Have you ever imagined being the fastest at everything, but still not being able to escape past mistakes? Leah Vaughn, the protagonist of our story, is the boy who managed to overcome physical limits, but ended up getting lost in the curves of life. A run against the police after a robbery may seem like the end, but for him, it was just the beginning of a turnaround that no one expected. How can someone go from a life of crime to a sponsorship with Adidas? The answer lies in something that many ignore: the power of sport to transform lives. When we think our destiny is set, a new chance always arises. But are we ready to take it? Leah Vaughn was. And you, are you ready for this race too? If this story has already captivated you, and you want more lessons on overcoming and inspiring comebacks, subscribe to the channel now. Don't miss any updates and join us on this journey of transformation. Leah Vaughn was used to being fast, not just on the athletic field, but also in life. On that sunny afternoon, the heat of the asphalt only seemed to push him to go faster. He ran, not for medals or trophies, but to escape the consequences of a wrong choice. The sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, mixed with people's screams, creating a symphony of tension. Adrenaline pulsed through his veins, and the wind cut his face as if it were trying to slow him down. At every step, he felt the weight of his mistake, but at the same time, his only alternative was to move forward. Overcoming, he thought, isn't just about winning races. Sometimes it's about surviving them. As he crossed the corner, he knew his speed would be his only ally. The police were slower, but they had something he didn't time. He, on the other hand, had drama in his life that made him run like it was a matter of life and death. It was no longer about escaping a tough workout or winning a competition. It was about not getting caught. Every street, every detour, was a chess game, where the most important piece was your ability to think and act quickly. The heavy breathing, the feet hitting the floor, it was all part of the show. "You won't catch me," he thought as a small smile appeared on his face. He was the fastest on the team, the coach's pride, and at that moment, all his skill was put to the test in a way he never imagined. The footsteps approached, but he increased his speed, feeling the asphalt beneath his feet, as if it were part of him. It was amazing how, even in the chaos, he could feel inspiration. It was as if that moment was the height of his skill, his turning point, where fear and skill merged into one. But running like that, to hide from a mistake, didn't have the same glory as a victory on the field. The weight of what he had done began to accumulate in his mind, and his grandmother's voice echoed in his thoughts. "Humility, my grandson, humility." He knew deep down he wasn't just running from the cops. He was running away from who he was becoming. This kind of race never ended in applause or medals, but in darkness and loneliness. And suddenly, a childhood memory came flooding back. He remembered the first time he ran with his father. In the park, it was a peaceful afternoon, without a care in the world. Running is not just about being the fastest, son. It's knowing where you're going. These words, which once seemed like a silly lesson, now made perfect sense. In that race against the law, he realized that, more than speed, his life lacked direction. He was fast, but running to where? Little by little, the tension began to change. Fatigue set in, and Leah Vaughn realized that although he was the fastest, he couldn't run forever. The police had time on their side, and in fact, it was the time he feared most, the time he had wasted, the time he needed to make up. Altruism. That word echoed in his mind as a reminder that he was no longer living just for himself, but also for the grandmother he loved so much. With a quick detour down an alley, Leah Vaughn managed to escape the officer's view for a moment. His lungs burned, and sweat ran down his face. He needed a plan. But amid the chaos, one thing was certain. Running forever was not the solution. Just like racing, he knew he would eventually have to stop. The finish line was close. But this time, it wasn't glory that awaited him. Something inside him was beginning to change. And it was at that moment that he realized that maybe this race wasn't about escaping. Maybe it was a chance to reevaluate everything. Speed had been his ally for so long, but now it seemed like his greatest enemy. Life was giving him a warning. No matter how fast you run, the wrong choices always catch up with you. Now, what would you do? Leah Vaughn and his friend, Mason, were elated after the robbery. The shine of the new shoe boxes made Mason's eyes shine. He imagined the branded clothes, the jewelry, the ostentation that money could bring. For him, that was the path to glory, his chance to win in life. But Leavon saw everything differently. While Mason was already thinking about luxuries, Leavon could only think about his grandmother. She was at home, struggling to pay the bills, and even with everything he had done wrong, he just wanted to help her. Money for Leavon was a way to provide a better life for herself, something he felt he owed since his father left. It was an internal battle between altruism and the temptation to take the easy way out. While Mason talked excitedly about the possibility of buying a new chain, Leavon barely listened. His mind was in the supermarket, where he watched his grandmother count every penny, trying to stretch what little they had. He knew the money from selling the shoes would be an immediate relief, but at what cost? The drama of being involved in something so wrong weighed more and more on his conscience. It was as if every step he took in that direction took him away from the boy who once dreamed of being someone his grandmother would be proud of. He didn't want to live a life of crime, but difficulties seemed to push him towards it. The irony of it all was clear. While his speed made him a star on the track team, his personal life fell apart. He was the fastest on the track, always overtaking his opponents and leading the team to victory. But outside of competition, he felt like he was running aimlessly, losing control of his own life. What was the point of being the fastest if, in the end, he was distancing himself from the values that really mattered? This internal struggle between public success and personal battles created constant tension in his life. In Levin's head, the idea of overcoming was distorted. It wasn't about winning races, but about overcoming the poverty that plagued his family. And as much as he was an excellent athlete, he still hadn't learned to run in the right direction. With each victory on the athletic field, he returned home feeling like a failure. The gold medal around his neck meant nothing compared to the weight of guilt on his chest. The contrast between these two worlds, that of sporting success and that of personal failure, was suffocating. Leavon remembered when his grandmother took him to training when he was still little. She smiled proudly, saying he was her inspiration. Now, everything seemed distant. He didn't want her to know the wrong choices she was making. The humility she had always preached was being replaced by a desperate need to solve her problems the wrong way. He was betraying everything she had taught him, and that hurt more than any punishment the system could impose. Mason didn't understand the weight Leavon carried. For him, life was a game of chance, and whoever was brave enough to play dirty would emerge victorious. But Leavon was beginning to realize that this worldview was not for him. Fast money brought temporary satisfaction, but it left scars that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. That small relief he felt when putting food on the table or paying a bill was always accompanied by a bitter feeling of guilt. While Mason celebrated another sale, Leavon looked at the empty streets. He knew his friend wasn't wrong to want more out of life, but the way they were trying to achieve that was all wrong. The turnaround he needed so much began to take shape in his mind. He knew that if he continued on this path, he would end up destroying not only himself, but also the one person who always believed in him, his grandmother. The weight of this responsibility was beginning to weigh down, and he didn't know how long he could continue. Leavon found himself trapped in a cycle of distorted overcoming. To the track team, he was a hero, the boy who always gave his best. But deep down, he knew he was failing where it mattered most. There was no trophy that could make him forget the fact that his grandmother depended on him, and that he was letting her down. Even without her knowing what he was doing to get the money, he felt that each lie took him further away from her. He knew he had to change, but doubt consumed him. He had a special ability, a chance to do something great with his life, but I was wasting it, all for a momentary need to solve immediate problems. It was a struggle between now and the future. Mason, with his promises of quick riches, was pulling him down a path that seemed to have no return. But his grandmother's smile when he came home was the only thing that kept him struggling to find a way out. What he would do next was still uncertain, but something inside him was changing. The race of life wasn't about who got there the fastest. It was about who made the right choices along the way. And Leavon knew that, at some point, he would have to choose between quick success and true overcoming. The adrenaline that drove Leavon on the track now no longer helped him. After a few days of escape and fear, the inevitable happened. He was caught. The sound of sirens, previously distant, now echoed in his ears, and the red and blue lights reflected in his face. The drama of his life was about to reach a new climax. But this time there was no escape. When the officers handcuffed him, he finally felt the weight of all his actions. That same sense of freedom he experienced running fast now seemed to turn into chains that bound him to a destiny he never wanted. When he was taken to the police station, he thought about his grandmother. Her face, the look of disappointment that would come, hurt more than anything else. He wasn't worried about what the system would do to him, but rather what his grandmother would think. He knew that she always saw him as a talented boy, an example of overcoming, and now he was about to destroy that image. The shame he felt was not for the crimes he committed, but for the pain he would cause to the only person who always believed in him. The humility with which she always treated him contrasted sharply with the arrogance of the wrong choices he had been making. As he waited in the interrogation room, his mind wandered. He remembered the stories his grandmother told him about how she had fought so hard to raise him, always believing that he could be someone better. But now he was before the law, and there was no escape. The officer who interrogated him was not interested in his talent or his good intentions. To him, Leavon was just another lost young man, a number in the statistics. The turnaround he needed in his life seemed to be getting further and further away. When her grandmother finally arrived at the police station, the silence between them was deafening. Her words, few and full of pain, penetrated deeper than any sentence he could receive. "Where did I go wrong with you, Leavon?" Those words echoed in his mind, over and over again. He knew it wasn't her upbringing that had led him here, but rather his own choices. However, the pain of seeing her disappointed made him question every step he had taken up until that moment. The overcoming that he sought so much did not seem to be within his reach. Leavon tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. All he wanted was to reverse time, run faster than he had ever run, and undo all the mistakes he made. But life was not a race back. Every wrong choice led him exactly where he was, and there was no escaping that reality. He looked into his grandmother's eyes, expecting to see anger or hatred, but all he found was sadness, and that sadness was heavier than anything else he could carry. The officer started talking about the legal consequences of what Leavon had done, but he was barely paying attention. His mind was elsewhere, reliving every moment when he could have chosen a different path. The races, the parties with Mason, the lies to his grandmother. It all played like a movie in his head. What haunted him most was not the possibility of going to prison, but the knowledge that he had let down the only person who mattered. He needed a turnaround in his life, but he still didn't know how to find it. When the judge handed down the sentence of 100 hours of community service, there was a certain relief, but also a feeling of emptiness. He knew his grandmother was by his side, but he didn't know how long she could keep believing in him. The selflessness he valued so much in his grandmother now felt like an enormous responsibility. He wanted to redeem himself, but the road ahead seemed long and difficult. It was time to face your choices, and this time, run in the right direction. On the way home, the silence between Leavon and his grandmother was suffocating. Every kilometer traveled in the car seemed like an eternity. He didn't know how to start asking for forgiveness. The words, "I'm sorry," seemed too small for everything he had done. But he knew that if he wanted to regain her trust, he would have to start somewhere. Maybe community service was a way to show that he still had some good left inside him. Overcoming, I thought, might come little by little. Back in the small apartment, Levin's grandmother sat in the worn armchair and looked at him. There was no need for words. The silence was a confirmation of how hurt they both were. He realized that her love had never diminished, but the disappointment was there, written in every line of her face. And it was this disappointment that Leavon promised himself he would never see again. He still didn't know how, but somehow he would transform his life. The race was just beginning. As Leavon walked out of the courtroom with his grandmother by his side, something inside him began to change. He had expected a severe punishment, something that would mark him forever. But instead, the judge gave him a second chance, 100 hours of community service, and the opportunity to join a track team. It was almost unreal. How could someone so lost deserve such a turn of events? Still, he felt like this was his chance to overcome. But was he ready to grab her? Or would it be another wasted opportunity? His coach, the same one who always believed in his potential, didn't just see him as a criminal. He saw something deeper. "You have a rare talent, Leavon," he would say, "but talent without direction is a waste." Those words echoed in Levin's mind for days. He didn't just want to be fast. He wanted to be someone his grandmother could be proud of. And now, he had a new road ahead of him, a path that could lead him to something much greater than running away from past mistakes. The first day of community service was tough, not physically but emotionally. He was surrounded by people who looked at him as if he were just another troubled kid. And in a way, he was. But inside, there was something burning, a desire to show that he was more than his mistakes. Every bag of trash he picked up, every wall he painted, was a step toward redemption. It wasn't easy, and he knew the road would be long. But every time he thought about his grandmother, he found the strength to carry on. In training, the environment was different. There, he was treated like an athlete, not a delinquent. The coach made him run like never before. Every workout was a chance to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. The speed he once used to run away now pushed him forward into something new. Every drop of sweat was a reminder that he was fighting for something greater. Overcoming wasn't about winning races. It was about redeeming yourself. Over time, he began to realize that running wasn't just physical. There was an internal race going on inside him, a contest between his past and his future. Mason was still calling him, trying to drag him back to his old life. But with each invitation, Leavon felt stronger about saying no. There was a new strength growing within him, something he had never felt before. He was finally starting to run in the right direction, and that was the real victory. The relationship with his grandmother, although silent, also began to change. She didn't talk much about what had happened, but there was a sparkle in her eyes when she saw him leave the house for training. She knew he was trying, and that was all she needed at that moment. The selflessness she had always demonstrated was now being mirrored in Levin's actions. He wasn't just running for himself, but for her, for everything she had sacrificed, so he could have a chance at life. The coach, always present, noticed the changes. "You're improving, Leavon, not just in your running time, but as a person." These words were fuel for him. Every time he heard this, he felt like he was on the right path. Community service continued, and although it was hard, it was a constant reminder of where he no longer wanted to be. He was beginning to see that the true path to overcoming was paved with difficult and consistent choices. There were moments of doubt, of course, times when he thought about giving up, about going back to the easy life that Mason offered. But in those moments, he always remembered what was at stake: your grandmother, your future, your own dignity. Every time he stepped onto the track, it was as if he was leaving a part of the old Leavon behind. He wasn't just racing the clock. He was running against his past, against everything that tried to pull him down. And then came the invitation to compete in a regional tournament. It was the chance he needed to show everyone, and himself, that he had truly changed. The coach was confident, but he knew this race would be much more than just a competition. It would be a test of character, of everything Leavon had been learning. He stood at the starting line, his heart pounding. This time, he wasn't running away from anything. He was running towards his future. Leavon gazed at the horizon as the sun set, lighting up the race track in a golden glow. Life had always been a race for him, but now it was different. There was an internal struggle going on inside him, a silent battle between who he was and who he wanted to be. Every practice, every second his feet touched the ground, he felt the tension of this conflict. On the one hand, Mason kept trying to pull him back into the easy life, promises of quick money, a way out of trouble. But on the other hand, there was something stronger growing inside him, a desire to overcome all this and be someone better. He was at a critical point, and he knew he could no longer delay this decision. With each step taken on the track, Leavon reflected on his choices. How did he get this far? Running away from problems instead of facing them. When he started stealing, he didn't think about the long-term consequences, just the immediate relief of putting food on the table for his grandmother. But now, he knew that each wrong choice was an additional weight that he would have to carry throughout his life. Running, once an escape, was now his way of processing this drama. He felt like he was running away from an old version of himself, a version he knew he needed to leave behind. Mason's memories haunted him. The friend who had once been his partner in everything was now a constant reminder of a past he wanted to forget. But the hardest part was admitting that part of him still felt the temptation to return. The easy money, the adrenaline, the feeling of being in control, all of this still seduced him. Yet each day, the weight of his grandmother's and his coach's expectations pulled him in the opposite direction. Overcoming, he thought, is not just about speed, it's about endurance. And he needed to resist that part of himself that was still stuck in the past. Leavon knew that in order to grow, he would need to face his own flaws head-on. The community service hours were a brutal reminder that every action has a consequence. But more than that, they were a lesson in humility. Working alongside people he previously would have ignored made him realize he wasn't so different. Everyone was fighting their own battles, and somehow that made him feel less alone. He began to understand that true overcoming came from connecting with others and recognizing that everyone faces difficulties. But it is the choices we make that define who we are. Conversations with his coach were also fundamental in this growth process. Leavon, the race isn't about who finishes first, it's about who keeps the pace until the end. That phrase stuck in his mind. The coach saw something in him that Leavon hadn't seen in himself for a long time: potential. But to reach that potential, he would have to leave the past behind once and for all. He knew that to do so, he would have to face Mason, not physically, but within himself. The real struggle was internal, and winning would mean finally freeing himself from the chains that held him back. However, life has a funny way of testing our decisions just when we're about to make big changes. Mason has appeared once again, with promises of a huge coup, something that could solve all of Levin's problems once and for all. It was tempting, almost irresistible. But this time, Leavon looked at his friend with different eyes. He saw what he had never seen before: the hopelessness of someone trapped in a cycle of bad choices. Mason wasn't an enemy, but a version of what Leavon could become if he didn't make the right choice. And in that moment, he knew he was ready to leave it all behind. The upheaval began to form within him. With every step he took on the track, he felt like he was running not to get away from something, but towards something bigger. The past couldn't be erased, but he could use these experiences to become someone better. The guilt he carried for the mistakes he made with his grandmother, for the time lost with Mason, was beginning to transform into determination. Now he wanted more than just to survive. He wanted to prosper, and to do that, he would need to keep running, but this time, with a clear purpose. At the end of each practice, as his teammates left, Leavon remained on the track, alone, reflecting on what was to come. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges that would test his resolve. But at the same time, he felt like something inside him had changed forever. It was no longer just about being the fastest. It was about being the best he could be, for himself and for the people who believed in him. He was ready to face any obstacle, because now he knew that the race of life was not about who crosses the finish line first, but about who has the courage to keep running. The sound of clapping echoed in the stands, but Leavon wasn't thinking about that. He was focused, eyes fixed on the finish line ahead. Everything he had been through up to that point, the difficulties, the wrong choices, the sleepless nights, seemed to culminate in that moment. Sport, which was once just an outlet, was now his path to redemption. Every step he took on the track distanced him from the old Leavon, the boy who had made mistakes. Now he ran not only for himself, but for his grandmother, for his coach, for everyone who believed in his potential. True overcoming began here, on the track, with every fiber of his body propelling him into the future. When the coach announced that Leavon would compete in the 400-meter relay, he knew this was his chance to show the world and himself that he had changed. The pressure was great, of course, but no greater than he had ever faced in his life. With each training session, he dedicated himself more, seeking not only to be the fastest, but also the most focused. Redemption would not come only through victory, but through continuous effort, through persistence. Each morning, when he woke up, He felt the weight of responsibility, but also the relief of knowing he was on the right path. Her grandmother's support, even in silence, was her greatest fuel. She didn't need to say anything. The simple fact that she was in the stands, cheering him on, was enough for Leavon to know he was doing the right thing. He remembered the times he saw her counting coins to pay the bills, the nights he had to lie to her about where he got the money. Now, every lap he took on the track was a way to pay off that debt. Her altruism had always moved him, and now he wanted to give back in the only way he knew how, by being the best he could be, in every way. The training was tough, but Leavon didn't complain. He knew that the pain he felt now was fleeting, while the legacy he was building would last forever. The coach encouraged him, saying he had everything he needed to break records. But Leavon knew that the most important race wasn't against the clock. It was against himself. Every obstacle, every tiredness, was a reminder that he was on the right path. Sport had become his redemption, a way to channel all his energy, his emotions, and transform his past into something positive. The opportunity came with an unexpected offer. Adidas, impressed by his performance, offered him sponsorship. It was more than just money. It was validation that all her hard work had paid off. Emotion took over him as he thought about what this meant for his life and, especially, for his grandmother. They would no longer have to worry about late rent or accumulated bills. The turnaround he needed so much was finally happening, and sport had been the catalyst for it all. On the day of the competition, his coach's words echoed in his mind. "Remember, Leavon, it's just you against you. Everything you need is already inside you." These words followed him as he stood at the starting line. The silence before the starting gun seemed to last an eternity. But when the bell sounded, Leavon shot forward like an arrow, each step carrying years of struggle, of sacrifice, of learning. The wind in your face, the sound of your feet touching the ground, the adrenaline, everything seemed to converge towards that moment of redemption. The relay was perfect. Each change of baton was smooth, almost as if the team had been rehearsing this their entire lives. When it was Levin's turn, he gave it his all. He felt every muscle in his body working in sync, driven not only by the will to win, but by the need to show the world who he really was. When he crossed the finish line, time seemed to slow down for a moment. He looked up into the stands and saw his grandmother smiling. There, in that smile, he found everything he needed. The victory was just the icing on the cake. Leavon was no longer the boy who ran from the police, nor the young man who made mistakes trying to survive. He had become an example of overcoming, of someone who knew how to find the light in the midst of darkness. And as he approached his grandmother after the race, he felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was at peace with himself. Sport, which was once just a skill, was now his salvation, his way of rewriting his own history. Now, with sponsorship from Adidas, he and his grandmother were ready to leave the past behind once and for all. The turnaround he had been longing for had finally arrived. But for Leavon, the most important thing was not the money or fame that would come. It was knowing that he had done the right thing, that he had chosen the path of redemption, and that, regardless of where life took him from now on, he would always remember that it was in sport that he found his true salvation. Levin's journey shows us that regardless of the wrong choices we make, there is always a way back. Overcoming and redemption are possible, but they require effort, determination, and, often, a push from the right people. And you, are you ready to take that first step in your own race? What's stopping you from leaving the past behind and running towards your future? Leavon discovered that true victory is not at the finish line, but in the process of becoming better every day. So what's your next race? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning from stories like this, full of lessons that can transform your life. Now it's your turn to chase your dreams.